The iron shackles around Violet Carmichael's wrists bit into her skin as her stepfather dragged her through the dusty streets of Pecos, Texas, toward the saloon where desperate men gathered to trade coin for things no human being should ever be bought or sold for. The August sun blazed overhead in 1882, turning the dirt road into waves of shimmering heat, and Violet stumbled over her worn boots while Harold Bentley yanked her forward with the casual cruelty of a man leading livestock to auction. "Move faster, girl," he spat, his yellowed teeth showing through cracked lips. "Mr. Garrison is waiting, and I need that money today. My Caroline deserves a proper wedding dress, not some hand-me-down rag." Violet's throat tightened with unshed tears, but she refused to let them fall. She had cried enough over the past 3 days since her stepfather announced his intentions. Her mother had been dead barely 6 months, taken by fever that swept through their small ranch, and already Harold had found himself a replacement. A younger woman from Dallas who had expensive tastes and no patience for a 20-year-old stepdaughter taking up space in the house. The saloon doors swung open as they approached, and Violet caught sight of Thomas Garrison standing just inside. He was a heavy-set man in his 50s, with greedy eyes that made her skin crawl whenever he visited the ranch. He owned the largest cattle operation in the county and had been widowed twice already. Rumor in town suggested his wives had simply worked themselves to death trying to please a man who could never be satisfied. "There she is," Garrison said, stepping out onto the wooden boardwalk. He circled Violet like she was a horse he was considering purchasing, and she kept her eyes fixed straight ahead, refusing to acknowledge his inspection. "She is pretty, I will give you that. But $300 is steep, Bentley. What if she cannot cook? What if she is barren?" "She can cook just fine," Harold said quickly. "Her mother taught her everything, and she is young and healthy. You will get plenty of work out of her, and probably sons too." Violet's stomach turned. They were negotiating her future as if she were nothing more than property. She thought about running, but where would she go? The nearest town was 20 miles away, and she had no money, no horse, nothing but the plain cotton dress on her back and the shackles on her wrists. $250, Garrison countered. "Final offer." Harold's face reddened. "Now see here, that is not what we agreed. $500. The voice came from behind them, deep and steady. Violet turned to see a tall man dismounting from a paint horse. He wore dusty brown trousers and a faded blue shirt, with a leather vest that had seen better days. A wide-brimmed hat shaded his face, but she could see strong features and eyes the color of storm clouds. A Colt revolver sat holstered at his hip, and everything about his bearing suggested he knew how to use it. "I beg your pardon?" Harold sputtered. The stranger stepped forward, and Violet noticed he moved with the easy confidence of someone who had spent most of his life in the saddle. He was probably in his mid-20s, she guessed, with sun-darkened skin and calloused hands that spoke of hard work. "I said $500. That is what you are asking for her, is it not?" Garrison's face turned purple. "Who the hell are you?" "Kieran Crawford," the man said simply. "I run cattle up north of here. Got paid out yesterday for a herd I drove to Fort Worth. Seems I have money to spend." "Well, Garrison and I have already been negotiating," Harold said, though his eyes had lit up at the mention of $500. That was nearly double what he had been asking for. $500, Kieran repeated, pulling a leather pouch from his pocket. "Right now, cash." Garrison took a threatening step toward Kieran. "You cannot just walk in here and what?" Kieran's hand moved to rest casually on his revolver. "Stop a man from conducting business? I am making an offer, same as you." The tension in the air grew thick. Violet held her breath, uncertain whether she should hope this stranger would outbid Garrison or pray they would all just leave her alone. At least Garrison was a known evil. This Kieran Crawford could be worse for all she knew. "500 it is," Harold said quickly, sensing the potential for violence and eager to conclude the transaction. "Though I should warn you, she has a stubborn streak." "I am not interested in your warnings," Kieran said, counting out bills from the pouch. "I am interested in concluding this transaction properly." Garrison muttered curses under his breath but backed away. He was a bully, but not fool enough to draw on a man who carried himself like Kieran Crawford did. "This is not over, Bentley," he said to Harold before stalking back into the saloon. Harold snatched the money from Kieran's hand and immediately began counting it. Satisfied, he shoved it into his pocket and turned to leave. He made it 3 steps before Violet called out to him. "You would really do this? Sell me like I am nothing?" Her voice cracked despite her best efforts to sound strong. Harold did not even look back. "You are nothing, girl. Your mother was too soft on you, filled your head with foolish notions. Caroline and I are leaving for Dallas tomorrow. Consider this your chance at a better life than you would have had with us." Then he was gone, disappearing around the corner toward the general store where his precious Caroline was likely spending money on her trousseau. Violet stood frozen, the reality of her situation crashing down on her. She was alone now, completely at the mercy of this stranger who had just purchased her like a slave. Kieran moved toward her, and she flinched. But instead of grabbing her, he pulled a key from his pocket. "Give me your hands." Confused, Violet held out her shackled wrists. He unlocked them quickly and the iron fell away. She rubbed at the red marks on her skin, unable to comprehend what was happening. "You have a choice now," Kieran said, his storm gray eyes meeting hers directly. "You can take my horse and ride out of here. I will give you another $100 to get you started somewhere new. Or you can come to my ranch and work for me. Fair wages, your own room in the bunkhouse, and you can leave whenever you want. No strings, no expectations beyond honest work." Violet stared at him. "I do not understand. You just paid $500 for me." "I paid $500 to get you away from that situation," Kieran corrected. "What you do next is entirely up to you, but decide quickly, because I do not want to stand in this heat all day, and Garrison might work up the courage to cause trouble once he is drunk enough." "Why would you do this?" she asked, still unable to process his words. "You do not even know me." "I know enough," he said quietly. "I know what it looks like when someone needs help, and I know what kind of man Thomas Garrison is. Whatever choice you make, at least it will be yours." Violet looked at the horse, then back at Kieran. She could run, take the money and the horse, and try to make it somewhere far from here. But where would she go? She had no family, no friends who could take her in. The world was dangerous for a woman alone, especially one with no experience beyond a small ranch. "What kind of work?" she asked cautiously. "Cooking, mostly," Kieran said. "My ranch hands are tired of burned beans and tough jerky. I lost my cook last month when he decided to try his luck in the California goldfields. If you can make decent food for a dozen men, you will earn your pay. I also need someone to help keep the main house clean and handle the vegetable garden." "And that is all?" She searched his face for deception, for any hint of the same hunger she had seen in Garrison's eyes. "That is all," he confirmed. "I will not lie and say my hands are perfect gentlemen, but they know I will fire anyone who disrespects you. You will be safe on my land, Miss Carmichael, you have my word." "How do you know my name?" "Your stepfather mentioned it while you were walking over. I have been in town selling cattle and heard rumors about what he planned to do. Figured I would see if those rumors were true." His jaw tightened. Wish they had not been. Violet made her decision. "I will come to your ranch, but I want to be clear that I am working for wages, nothing more." "Understood," Kieran said with a slight nod. "Can you ride?" "Yes." "Good. We will stop by the general store so you can pick up any supplies you need, and then we will head out. It is a few hours' ride to the ranch." As they walked toward the store, Violet's mind raced with questions and uncertainties. But beneath the fear and confusion, a tiny spark of something else flickered to life. Hope. Maybe, just maybe, she had been given a genuine chance at a new beginning. The general store was crowded with afternoon shoppers, and Violet spotted her stepfather's new bride to be examining fabric near the back. Caroline was a pretty woman of about 30 with blonde curls and a rosebud mouth that seemed perpetually pursed in dissatisfaction. She glanced up as Violet entered with Kieran, and her eyes widened. "Violet? What are you doing here? Harold said he was taking care of everything." "He did," Violet said coolly. "I'm leaving with Mr. Crawford now." Caroline's gaze flickered to Kieran, and her expression shifted to something calculating. I see. Well, I suppose that works out for everyone then. Indeed, Violet said, refusing to give the woman the satisfaction of seeing her upset. She turned to Kieran. I will be quick. True to her word, Violet gathered only essentials: a spare dress, sturdy work boots, undergarments, a hairbrush, and a few personal items. She had never been one for extravagance, and besides, she had no idea how much Kieran expected her to spend. When she brought the items to the counter, he paid without comment, adding a warm coat and gloves to the pile. Gets cold at night, he explained when she looked at him questioningly. Even in summer, the temperature drops significantly once the sun goes down. They left the store and walked to where his horse waited. Kieran secured her packages behind the saddle, then mounted and reached down to help her up. Violet hesitated only a moment before taking his hand and letting him pull her up behind him. She settled onto the horse's back, acutely aware of how close she was to this man she barely knew. Hold on, Kieran said, and Violet wrapped her arms cautiously around his waist as he urged the horse into motion. They rode out of Pecos, heading northwest, leaving behind the only home Violet had ever known. The landscape stretched out before them in shades of gold and brown, dotted with scrub brush and the occasional mesquite tree. The Pecos River ran somewhere to their west, a vital lifeline in this harsh country. Tell me about your ranch, Violet said after they had been riding for nearly an hour. The silence had grown heavy, and she wanted to know what she was getting herself into. It is called the Crawford Ranch, Kieran said. Not very original, I know. I started it 5 years ago with money I saved working as a ranch hand and then as a trail boss. Got a decent chunk of land, good water access. I run about 2,000 head of cattle right now with plans to expand. I have 11 men working for me full-time, plus a few seasonal hands during roundup and drive season. That is impressive for someone your age, Violet observed. I am 26, Kieran said. Started working cattle when I was 14. It is all I have ever known, really. Where is your family? A pause. Gone. My parents died in a wagon accident when I was 12. I have a sister back in Missouri who is married with children of her own. We write occasionally, but we are not close. I am sorry, Violet said softly. It was a long time ago, Kieran replied, though she could hear the old pain in his voice. What about you? Any other family besides your stepfather? No, my real father died when I was 10. He was a good man, kind. My mother remarried Harold 3 years later, and I think she regretted it almost immediately. But by then she was pregnant, and she lost the baby at 6 months. She was never quite the same after that. When the fever took her this spring, I think part of her was ready to go. That is a heavy burden to carry, Kieran said. We all carry something, Violet replied. They fell silent again, but this time it felt less awkward. The horse's steady rhythm and the warm sun overhead made Violet's eyelids heavy. She had barely slept in days, too anxious about her fate. Now, exhausted and emotionally drained, she found herself nodding off against Kieran's back. She woke when the horse stopped. Blinking, she realized they had arrived at a small creek lined with cottonwood trees. The sun was lower in the sky now, probably around 5 in the afternoon. We will rest here for a bit, Kieran said, dismounting and then helping her down. Let the horse drink and stretch our legs. Violet walked to the creek's edge and knelt, cupping the cool water in her hands and splashing it on her face. It felt wonderful after the hot, dusty ride. When she looked up, she found Kieran watching her with an unreadable expression. What? She asked, suddenly self-conscious. Nothing, he said quickly, looking away. I was just thinking you have been through hell today, and you are handling it better than most people would. I learned a long time ago that falling apart does not change anything, Violet said. You just have to keep moving forward. That is a hard lesson to learn young. Yes, it is. They stayed by the creek for perhaps 20 minutes before continuing their journey. As they rode, Violet began to notice more signs of civilization. Well-maintained fences, grazing cattle bearing the same brand, and eventually a dirt road that had been worn smooth by wagon wheels. Almost there, Kieran said, and Violet felt her stomach flutter with nervousness. The ranch came into view as they crested a small rise. It was larger than Violet had expected, with a substantial main house built from rough-hewn logs, a long bunkhouse, several barns and outbuildings, and a network of corrals. Cattle dotted the surrounding hills, and she could see several men working near one of the barns. As they rode into the yard, the men stopped what they were doing to stare. Kieran dismounted and helped Violet down, then grabbed her packages from the horse. "Listen up," he called out, and the men drifted closer. "This is Miss Violet Carmichael. She will be working as our new cook and housekeeper. You will treat her with respect, or you will find employment elsewhere. Understood?" The men nodded, a few removing their hats politely. They were a rough-looking bunch, weathered and worn from years of hard work, but Violet could see curiosity rather than hostility in most of their faces. "Madam," one of them said, an older man with a gray beard, "name is Dutch. I am the foreman here. Good to have someone who can cook proper meals. We have been suffering under Kieran's attempts at stew for too long now." A few of the men chuckled, and Kieran shook his head ruefully. "I never claimed to be a good cook, Dutch. That is why I am smart enough to hire someone with actual skills." "I will do my best," Violet said, finding her voice. "What time do you usually eat supper?" "Sundown usually," Dutch said. "But it is already past that today. Do not worry about cooking tonight. We have some leftover beans and cornbread that will do us fine." "Actually," Kieran interjected, let me show you where everything is and you can decide if you have the energy to put something together. No pressure either way." He led her to the main house, a spacious building with a large front porch. Inside, Violet found herself in a comfortable living area with handmade furniture and woven rugs on the wooden floors. Everything was clean but sparse, decorated with the practical eye of someone who valued function over form. "Kitchen is through here," Kieran said, leading her through a doorway. The kitchen was well equipped with a large iron stove, plenty of counter space, and shelves stocked with basic supplies. "I keep the pantry fairly full. We get supply runs from town once a month, more often if needed." Violet looked around, her practiced eye taking inventory. She could work with this. "I can make biscuits and gravy. Do you have sausage?" "In the cold cellar out back," Kieran said, pointing. "Along with butter, milk, eggs. We keep chicken, so eggs are always fresh." "Give me an hour," Violet said, already moving toward the pantry to assess what she had to work with. Kieran hesitated. "You really do not have to—" "I know," Violet interrupted, "but I want to. I need to feel useful right now, and cooking is something I am good at." Understanding crossed his face, and he nodded. "All right. I will let the men know to wash up. If you need anything, just holler." Once he left, Violet tied back her hair and got to work. Her hands moved automatically through familiar tasks, mixing flour and baking powder for biscuits, crumbling sausage into a hot pan, preparing a rich gravy. Cooking had always been a comfort to her, a way to create something good even when everything else fell apart. An hour and a half later, she had produced 3 dozen fluffy biscuits, a huge pot of sausage gravy, and scrambled eggs cooked with butter and cream. She stepped onto the porch and rang the dinner bell she had spotted hanging there. The men appeared quickly, filing into the large dining room adjacent to the kitchen. Kieran had set the long table while she cooked, laying out plates and utensils. The men sat and Violet brought out the food, setting the serving dishes in the center of the table. For a moment there was silence as the men stared at the spread before them. Then they dug in with enthusiasm that made Violet smile despite her exhaustion. "Lord have mercy," one young hand said around a mouthful of biscuit. "This is the best thing I've eaten in months." "Mind your manners, Tommy," Dutch said. But he too looked pleased as he helped himself to seconds. Kieran caught Violet's eye from across the table and gave her an approving nod. She felt warmth spread through her chest, a strange sensation after the coldness of her stepfather's rejection. These men, strangers all, were appreciating her efforts in a way Harold never had. She served herself a small plate and ate standing in the kitchen, suddenly shy about joining the men at the table. When they finished, several of them brought their dishes to her with genuine thanks, and Tommy even offered to help wash up. I can manage, Violet said. You all have work tomorrow, I'm sure. So do you, the young cowboy pointed out, but he left when she insisted. Kieran was the last to bring his plate. That was exceptional, he said quietly. Thank you. You're welcome, Violet replied, taking the dish from him. Where will I be sleeping? Oh, right, let me show you. He picked up her packages, which he had left in the living room, and led her down a hallway. He stopped at a door near the end. This was supposed to be a guest room, but I have never had guests. It is yours now. The room was simple but clean, with a real bed covered in quilts, a dresser, a washstand with a basin and pitcher, and a small window that looked out over the ranch. Violet felt tears prick her eyes. It was more than she had dared hope for. The bunkhouse is about 50 yards from here, Kieran continued, so you will have privacy. There is a lock on the door if that makes you feel more comfortable. And like I said, you are free to leave whenever you want. I meant that. I believe you, Violet said softly. Thank you, Mr. Crawford, for everything. Kieran, he corrected. We do not stand much on formality around here. Kieran, she repeated. Then you should call me Violet. He smiled, a genuine expression that softened his features and made him look younger. Sleep well, Violet. Tomorrow will be a long day, but Dutch will help you figure out the routine. After he left, Violet closed the door and leaned against it. She was safe. She had a room, a job, and apparently a choice in her own future. It was more than she had possessed that morning, and the relief was overwhelming. She changed into her nightgown, washed her face and hands, and climbed into the bed. The mattress was comfortable, the quilts warm, and for the first time in days, Violet allowed herself to truly relax. As sleep claimed her, she found herself thinking about storm-gray eyes and a quiet voice offering her freedom when everyone else had tried to take it away. The next morning, Violet woke before dawn out of habit. She dressed quickly in her work dress, braided her hair, and made her way to the kitchen. The house was silent, but she could hear sounds from outside as the ranch began to stir. She started coffee first, then began mixing dough for breakfast biscuits. By the time the sun started painting the sky pink, she had biscuits in the oven, bacon sizzling on the stove, and eggs ready to scramble. She had also found potatoes in the cold cellar and was frying them with onions. Kieran emerged from what she assumed was his bedroom, looking surprised to find her already cooking. You are up early. Farm habits, Violet said with a shrug. Breakfast will be ready in about 15 minutes. I will let the men know. He paused, inhaling deeply. Something smells incredible. Just bacon and eggs, Violet said, but she felt pleased by the compliment. Breakfast was another success, with the men eating heartily before heading out to their various tasks. Dutch stayed behind to give Violet a tour of the ranch and explain the daily routine. We usually have 3 meals, he said as they walked. Breakfast at dawn, dinner around noon, and supper at sundown. The men pack their own lunches if they are working far from the ranch house, but most days they will come back for a hot meal. Kieran will give you money for supplies once a week, and we make the big town run on the first Saturday of every month. What about laundry? Violet asked. The men handle their own mostly, but Kieran usually pays someone in town to do his. If you want to take that on for extra wages, I'm sure he would appreciate it. They continued the tour, with Dutch showing her the chicken coop, the vegetable garden that had been sadly neglected, the smokehouse, and the various storage areas. By the time they finished, Violet's head was spinning with information, but she felt more confident about her ability to manage her responsibilities. The days settled into a rhythm. Violet rose before dawn to prepare breakfast, spent her mornings cleaning and maintaining the house, prepared dinner, tended the garden in the afternoon, and then made supper. The work was hard but satisfying, and the men's genuine appreciation for her cooking made it worthwhile. Kieran was a respectful employer, always polite but maintaining a professional distance. He would thank her for meals, ask if she needed anything, and make sure she had money for supplies, but otherwise he left her alone. Violet told herself she was grateful for the space, but she found herself watching him when he did not notice, curious about the man who had given her back her freedom. 2 weeks after her arrival, a sudden thunderstorm rolled in during the afternoon. Violet was in the garden harvesting tomatoes when the first drops fell. Within seconds, the sky opened up, and she was drenched. She ran for the house, laughing despite herself at the absurdity of being caught in such a downpour. She burst through the kitchen door to find Kieran standing there, equally soaked. He had apparently been caught out checking the fences. "Quite a storm," he said, water dripping from his hat brim. "Yes," Violet agreed, suddenly very aware of how her wet dress clung to her body. She grabbed a towel from a drawer and began drying her face and hair. Kieran did the same, and for a moment they both stood there in the kitchen, listening to the rain hammer against the roof. Thunder rumbled overhead and lightning flashed through the windows. "I should change," Violet said, moving toward the hallway. "Violet, wait." Kieran's voice stopped her. She turned back, and something in his expression made her heart beat faster. "I wanted to say that you have done an excellent job these past 2 weeks. The men are happier, the house has never looked better, and I am eating better than I have in years." "Thank you," Violet said. "I am grateful for the opportunity." "That is not what I mean." He took a step closer, then seemed to think better of it and stopped. "I mean that I am glad you are here, not just because of the work, but because—" He trailed off, looking frustrated with himself. "Because?" Violet prompted, her pulse racing. "Because I like having you here," he admitted. "I like hearing you sing while you cook. I like the way you laugh with Dutch when he tells his terrible jokes. I like how you have brought life to this place." Violet's breath caught. She'd been trying so hard not to develop feelings for Kieran, knowing it would only complicate her situation. But hearing him say these things made her own carefully guarded emotions surge to the surface. "I like being here," she said quietly. "You have given me a home when I had nothing. You treated me with kindness when you could have—" She could not finish the sentence. "I would never," Kieran said firmly. "You deserve to be treated with respect and dignity. Every person does." The intensity in his eyes made Violet's skin tingle. She took a step toward him, drawn by something she could not name. He met her halfway, and suddenly they were standing so close she could feel the warmth radiating from his body despite their wet clothes. "Violet," he said, his voice rough, "if I am reading this wrong, tell me now." Instead of answering with words, she reached up and touched his face. His skin was rough with stubble, warm beneath her fingertips. He closed his eyes briefly, as if savoring the contact, then opened them to look at her with such raw emotion that it took her breath away. He kissed her gently, questioningly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, but Violet did not want to pull away. She kissed him back, pouring weeks of loneliness and fear and tentative hope into that single point of connection. When they finally separated, both breathing hard, Kieran rested his forehead against hers. "I did not pay for you to expect this," he said urgently. "I need you to know that. If you want this to just be about work, I will respect that completely." "I know," Violet assured him. "But I do not want that. I want—" She hesitated, trying to find the words. "I want to see where this goes, if you do." "More than anything," Kieran said, "but slowly. I want to do this right, Violet. I want to court you properly." "In case you have not noticed, we are living in the same house," Violet pointed out with a small smile. "Traditional courting might be difficult." "Then we will make our own traditions," Kieran said, starting with me asking if you would take a walk with me after supper tonight, assuming the storm passes." "I would like that very much." The storm did pass, leaving the world fresh and clean smelling. After supper, Kieran and Violet walked along the creek that ran through his property, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about his dreams for the ranch, his hopes to build it into something substantial that could support not just him, but a family someday. She told him about her mother, about the small joys of her childhood before Harold entered their lives, about her love of books and her secret dream of maybe teaching children someday. "Why secret?" Kieran asked. "Because Harold said it was foolish. Said I should focus on practical things, not fill my head with notions." "It is not foolish," Kieran said firmly. "In fact, I think it would be wonderful. Pecos could use a good teacher. Maybe someday, Violet said, though the dream felt closer now than it ever had before. They walked until the stars came out, brilliant against the dark sky. When Kieran walked Violet back to the house, he kissed her goodnight on the porch, sweet and chaste, before heading to the bunkhouse where he had been sleeping since she arrived. "Why are you sleeping in the bunkhouse?" Violet asked suddenly. "This is your house." "Because I wanted you to feel safe and comfortable," Kieran said. "I will move back into the main house when and if you want me to, not before." The gesture touched Violet deeply. "You can move back in," she said. "I trust you, Kieran." He smiled. "All right, thank you." Over the following weeks, their relationship deepened. Kieran courted Violet with a mixture of traditional gestures and practical considerations for their unusual living situation. He brought her wildflowers from the range. He made sure she had a break every afternoon to rest. He taught her to ride better, taking her out on gentle trail rides that showed her the beauty of his land. Violet found herself falling genuinely in love with him, not out of gratitude or obligation, but because of who he was. Kieran was strong but gentle, ambitious but fair. He treated everyone with respect, from his lowest ranch hand to the banker in town. He had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh. And when he looked at her, she felt seen in a way she had never experienced before. One evening, about 6 weeks after her arrival, Kieran asked her to come outside after supper. Curious, Violet followed him to the porch, where he had set up 2 chairs and a small table with coffee. "What is this?" she asked, delighted. "I wanted to talk to you about something important," Kieran said, suddenly looking nervous. "And I thought a nice setting might help." They sat, and Violet waited while Kieran gathered his thoughts. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and somewhere a bird sang its evening song. "Violet, I know we have not been doing this courting thing for very long," Kieran began, "and I know your life has been turned upside down recently. But I need you to know that what I feel for you is real. It is not about convenience or having a cook or any of that." "I know," Violet said softly. "I feel the same way about you." Relief crossed his face. "Good. That is good. Because I have been thinking about the future, and I cannot imagine it without you in it." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. "This was my grandmother's ring. My mother gave it to me before she died, told me to save it for the woman I wanted to marry." Violet's heart nearly stopped. "Kieran, I am not asking you to marry me right now," he said quickly. "I know it is too soon for that, but I wanted you to have this ring as a promise that I'm serious about us, about building a life together. When you are ready, if you are ready, I will ask you properly, but for now, I just want you to know my intentions are honorable." He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small clear stone. It was not fancy or expensive, but it was beautiful in its simplicity. "It is lovely," Violet whispered, tears gathering in her eyes. "Will you accept it?" Kieran asked. "Not as an engagement ring, but as a promise ring, a symbol that we are working towards something together?" "Yes," Violet said without hesitation. "Yes, I will accept it." Kieran slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly. Then he pulled her close and kissed her, and Violet felt the last walls around her heart crumble. She was in love with this man completely and utterly, and the realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. That night, lying in her bed, Violet turned the ring on her finger and marveled at how much her life had changed in just 2 months. She had gone from being sold like property to being courted by a good man who treated her like she was precious. It felt like a miracle. The next morning, Dutch noticed the ring immediately. "Well now," he said with a knowing smile. "Looks like things are progressing nicely." "They are," Violet confirmed, unable to stop smiling. "Good. Kieran is a fine man, Miss Violet. Best boss I ever worked for. He deserves happiness, and so do you." "Thank you, Dutch." The other ranch hands noticed soon after and offered their congratulations. It warmed Violet's heart to see how genuinely pleased they were. She had worried they might be resentful or uncomfortable with the situation, but instead they seemed delighted that their boss had found someone. As fall approached, bringing cooler temperatures and the promise of roundup season, Violet settled more fully into her role at the ranch. She expanded the garden, put up preserves for winter, and learned the rhythms of ranch life. She also started teaching some of the younger hands to read in the evenings, discovering that several of them had never learned as children. Kieran supported this endeavor enthusiastically, even purchasing books from town to help with the lessons. "You are already teaching," he pointed out one evening as they watched Tommy painstakingly sound out words from a primer, "and doing a fine job of it." "It is just a few men," Violet said, but she felt proud nonetheless. "It is a start," Kieran replied. October brought the fall roundup, and the ranch became a hive of activity as the men worked long hours gathering cattle for sorting and shipping. Violet kept everyone fed with hearty meals and strong coffee, often working from before dawn until well after dark. One evening, Kieran stumbled in exhausted and found her asleep at the kitchen table, her head resting on her folded arms. He gently woke her and insisted on walking her to her room. "You are working yourself too hard," he said, concerned. "So are you," Violet pointed out. "Fair enough. But once roundup is over, I'm taking you on a real outing, maybe into town for a proper dinner at the hotel restaurant. Would you like that?" "I would love that," Violet said. True to his word, when roundup ended successfully in mid-October, Kieran declared himself and Violet both deserving of a day off. They rode into Pecos on a beautiful Saturday morning, the air crisp and clean. Violet had not been back to town since the day Kieran had bought her freedom, and she felt nervous about what they might encounter. But Kieran seemed unconcerned, helping her down from her horse in front of the general store and offering his arm as they walked down the main street. They ran into several people Kieran knew, and he introduced Violet without hesitation as his intended. Most responded with congratulations and friendly curiosity. But as they were heading toward the hotel for dinner, they encountered Thomas Garrison. The older man's face darkened when he saw them. "Crawford, I see you are still keeping that girl." "Miss Carmichael is my intended," Kieran said evenly, "and I will thank you to address her with respect." Garrison's lip curled. "Buying yourself a wife now? What did that cost you?" Violet felt Kieran tense beside her, but before he could respond, she spoke up. "Mr. Crawford did not buy a wife. He gave me a choice when no one else would. There is a difference, though I do not expect a man like you to understand it." Garrison's face turned red. "You little—" "That is enough," Kieran interrupted, his voice hard. "You need to move along now, Garrison." For a moment it seemed like the older man might push the issue. But several townspeople had stopped to watch the confrontation, and Garrison apparently decided discretion was the better part of valor. He stalked off, muttering curses. "I am sorry," Violet said quietly. "I should not have antagonized him." "Do not apologize," Kieran said. "You spoke the truth. I am proud of you." They continued to the hotel, where the restaurant served them an excellent meal of roast chicken, fresh bread, and apple pie. It was the closest thing to a real date they had experienced, and Violet savored every moment. As they rode home that evening full and content, Kieran reached over and took Violet's hand. "I have been thinking," he said, "about what I said about waiting to propose properly." "Yes?" Violet's heart sped up. "I do not want to wait anymore," Kieran said. "These past 3 months with you have been the happiest of my life. I wake up every morning grateful that you chose to stay, and I go to sleep every night hoping you will still be there tomorrow. I love you, Violet Carmichael. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you hum while you cook. I love how you see the best in people and how you are not afraid to speak your mind. I want to marry you if you will have me." Tears streamed down Violet's face, but they were happy tears. "I love you too, Kieran Crawford, and yes, I will marry you." He whooped with joy, causing both horses to sidestep nervously. Then he was pulling her close, kissing her deeply, despite the awkwardness of being on horseback. When they finally separated, both laughing, Kieran's eyes shone. When? He asked. When can we get married? Whenever you want, Violet said. Tomorrow, next week, next month. I do not need a big wedding or a fancy dress. I just need you. Next weekend, Kieran decided. That gives us time to arrange things and invite people, but not so long that I have to wait forever to make you my wife officially. They rode the rest of the way home, making plans and dreaming about their future together. When they arrived back at the ranch, Kieran announced their engagement to the men, who cheered and congratulated them enthusiastically. Dutch shook Kieran's hand and kissed Violet's cheek, looking genuinely emotional. About damn time, boss, he said gruffly. We have all been waiting for you to stop being so cautious and just ask her already. You knew? Kieran asked, surprised. Everyone knew, Dutch said with a laugh. The way you two look at each other, a blind man could see you are in love. The next week passed in a blur of preparation. Violet sewed herself a simple but pretty dress in cream-colored cotton. Kieran arranged for a preacher to come out to the ranch for the ceremony. Dutch and the men decorated the main house with wildflowers and whatever decorations they could improvise. Violet sent word to a few people in town she had become friendly with, and was surprised when several showed up on the morning of the wedding. Kieran's sister in Missouri could not make it on such short notice, but she sent a warm telegram of congratulations and a promise to visit in the spring. The ceremony took place on a beautiful Saturday afternoon in late October. The air was cool and smelled of autumn, and the trees along the creek had begun to turn gold. Violet stood on the porch of the ranch house in her new dress, wildflowers in her hair, and watched Kieran approach with Dutch at his side. He looked handsome in clean trousers and a new shirt, his hair freshly cut and his face cleanly shaved. But it was the expression in his eyes that made Violet's breath catch love and wonder and a fierce protectiveness that promised she would always be safe with him. The preacher kept the ceremony short and sweet, and when he pronounced them husband and wife, Kieran kissed Violet with such tenderness that several of the men whistled and cheered. Violet laughed against his mouth, happier than she could remember ever being. They celebrated with a feast that Violet had prepared with help from the women who had come from town. There was music and dancing and laughter, and as the sun set and the stars came out, Violet found herself standing with her husband's arms around her, watching their guests enjoy themselves. Happy? Kieran murmured in her ear. Incredibly, Violet replied. Though if you had told me 5 months ago that this is where I would be, I would not have believed you. I knew the moment I saw you standing there with those shackles on your wrists that you were someone special, Kieran said. I did not know I would fall in love with you, but I am so glad I did. So am I, Violet said, turning in his arms to kiss him properly. Eventually the guests departed, and the ranch hands discreetly made themselves scarce. Kieran carried Violet over the threshold of their home, making her laugh at the traditional gesture. He set her down gently in their bedroom, which someone had decorated with flowers and candles. Are you nervous? Kieran asked softly. A little, Violet admitted, but mostly I'm just happy. Me too. They came together with sweetness and passion, learning each other's bodies with gentle exploration. Kieran was patient and considerate, making sure Violet felt safe and cherished. And when they finally joined completely, Violet felt a sense of rightness that brought tears to her eyes. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the quilts, talking quietly about everything and nothing. Violet traced the scars on Kieran's chest and arms, each one a story of hard work and dangerous moments. He kissed the calluses on her hands, telling her they were proof of her strength and determination. I want to give you everything, Kieran said eventually. A good life, a family if you want one, the chance to pursue your dreams of teaching, whatever you need to be happy. I just need you, Violet said simply. Everything else is extra. You have me, Kieran promised. For the rest of my life, you have me. The winter passed peacefully. Violet settled into her new role as the ranch owner's wife, and while her duties did not change much, she felt a new sense of belonging and purpose. She continued her reading lessons with the men, and word spread enough that several families from surrounding ranches asked if she would teach their children as well. By spring, Violet was running an informal school 3 afternoons a week in the ranch's large dining room. She taught reading, writing and arithmetic to a dozen children ranging from 6 to 14. Kieran supported the endeavor completely, even building proper desks and acquiring textbooks. "You are making a real difference," he told her one evening as they watched the children head home. "These families cannot afford to send their children away to proper schools, but you are giving them an education right here." "It makes me feel like I'm doing something meaningful," Violet said. "I love cooking and keeping our home, but this fulfills something else in me." "I understand," Kieran said, "just like ranching does for me." That spring also brought the news that Violet was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but waited to tell Kieran until she was certain. When she finally shared the news one morning over breakfast, his face transformed with joy. "A baby?" he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We are going to have a baby?" "In late October, I think," Violet confirmed, laughing as he swept her up in his arms and spun her around. "I am going to be a father," Kieran said wonderingly. "We need to prepare. We need a cradle and baby clothes, and—" "We have time," Violet assured him. 6 months is plenty of time to get ready." But Kieran threw himself into preparations with the same intensity he brought to everything. He built a beautiful cradle from oak, carved with intricate designs. He made sure Violet did not overwork herself, taking on some of her household duties to lighten her load. He read books about babies and child rearing, determined to be the best father possible. "You are going to be wonderful," Violet told him one evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. Her belly was just starting to show, a small rounded bump that Kieran could not stop touching. "I hope so," he said. "I want to give our child everything I did not have. Stability, love, 2 parents who are devoted to each other and to them." "They will have all of that," Violet promised. Summer brought the hard work of running the ranch, but Kieran made sure Violet rested as much as possible. The ranch hands were endlessly considerate, helping with heavy tasks and making sure she did not overexert herself. Dutch appointed himself Violet's unofficial protector, watching over her like a devoted uncle. In September, Violet closed her informal school for a few months, knowing she would need time after the baby was born. Her students gave her a farewell party, presenting her with a beautiful quilt they and their mothers had made together. Violet cried happy tears as she thanked them. "We will be back in January," she promised. "I am not giving up on you." October arrived with crisp, cool weather. Violet's belly had grown large, and she moved more slowly now, but she had never felt better. The pregnancy had been easy overall, and she felt healthy and strong. On a Tuesday afternoon in late October, almost exactly a year after her wedding, Violet's labor began. Kieran immediately sent for the midwife from town, a capable woman named Sarah who had delivered half the babies in the county. Then he paced the living room while Dutch and Sarah attended to Violet. The labor was long, but not overly difficult. As evening fell, Violet gave birth to a healthy baby boy with strong lungs and a head of dark hair. When Sarah placed the baby in her arms, Violet felt a love so overwhelming it took her breath away. Kieran came in moments later, his face pale with worry. "Are you all right? Is the baby—" "Come meet your son," Violet said softly. Kieran approached slowly, as if afraid he might break something. When he looked down at the tiny bundle in Violet's arms, tears started streaming down his face. "A son," he whispered. "We have a son." "What should we name him?" Violet asked. They had discussed names, but never quite settled on one. Now looking at their baby's perfect little face, Kieran said, "What about James, after my father?" "James Crawford," Violet tested. "I love it. James it is." Kieran gently took the baby, cradling him with surprising confidence for someone who had never held an infant before. "Hello, James," he said. "I am your papa, and I promise I'm going to do everything I can to give you a good life." The baby squirmed and made a small noise, and Kieran's face lit up with wonder. Violet watched her husband fall in love with their son and felt her heart expand even more. The ranch hands crowded around the next morning to meet the newest member of their family. Dutch held the baby with the ease of someone who had children of his own somewhere, and the younger men looked both fascinated and slightly terrified by the tiny human. "He is perfect, Miss Violet," Tommy said, and the others agreed. Life settled into a new rhythm with a baby in the house. Violet had worried she might feel overwhelmed, but Kieran was an attentive father who shared the nighttime feedings and diaper changes. Dutch and the other men helped with whatever they could, and several of the ranch wives from neighboring properties stopped by to offer advice and assistance. By the time James was 3 months old, Violet felt ready to resume her teaching. She brought the baby with her to lessons, and the children adored him. James would sleep in his cradle while Violet taught, and when he woke, the older girls would take turns entertaining him. The winter of 1883 was mild, and the ranch prospered. Kieran expanded his herd and hired 2 more permanent hands. With the increased income, he was able to make improvements to the property and even talked about building a proper schoolhouse on the ranch land. "We could hire you as the official teacher," he suggested one evening, "pay you a salary and make it legitimate." "I would need certification for that," Violet pointed out. "Then we will figure out how to get you certified," Kieran said, "if that is what you want." It was what Violet wanted, and over the next few years she worked toward that goal. She studied with a certified teacher from a nearby town, took examinations, and eventually received her teaching certificate in 1885. By then, James was 2 years old, and Violet was pregnant with their second child. This time, she gave birth to a daughter they named Grace, with blonde hair like Violet's mother and blue eyes that would eventually turn hazel. James was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything, even though he was too young to do much. "Careful, James," Violet would say as her son tried to pat the baby's head. "Gentle touches." Kieran built the schoolhouse in the spring of 1886, a beautiful one-room building with proper desks, a blackboard, and shelves for books. Violet officially became the Crawford School's first and only teacher, educating children from their ranch and the surrounding properties. Life was full and busy, but Violet had never been happier. She had a husband who loved her deeply, 2 beautiful children, meaningful work, and a community that respected her. Every day she thanked God for the choice Kieran had given her that awful day in Pecos, and for the courage she had found to choose a future with him. The years passed with the steady rhythm of ranch life. James grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved helping his father with the cattle. Grace was more outgoing, always laughing and getting into mischief. In 1888, Violet gave birth to twin boys, Thomas and Henry, who kept everyone on their toes with their energy and matching faces that made it hard to tell them apart. The ranch continued to prosper under Kieran's management. He gained a reputation as a fair employer and savvy cattleman, and young men would come from miles around hoping for a position on his crew. Dutch eventually retired in 1890, settling on a small parcel of land Kieran gifted him near the main ranch. He remained a beloved fixture in their lives, often coming by to tell stories to the children and help with various projects. Violet's school grew as well, eventually serving nearly 30 students from the surrounding area. She hired an assistant teacher in 1891 when the numbers became too much for one person to handle effectively. The schoolhouse became a center for the community, hosting dances, meetings, and holiday celebrations. On their 10th wedding anniversary in October 1893, Kieran surprised Violet with a beautiful gold locket. Inside were tiny photographs of their 4 children. "I wanted you to have something to commemorate everything we have built together," he said as he fastened it around her neck. 10 years ago, I thought I was just helping someone in a bad situation. I had no idea I was meeting the love of my life." "I felt so lost that day," Violet admitted, touching the locket. "I thought my life was over, but you showed me it was just beginning." They stood on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over the land they had built their life on. Their children's laughter drifted from inside where they were supposedly getting ready for bed, but were more likely playing instead. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I had not been in town that day?" Kieran asked. "Sometimes," Violet said honestly, "but I try not to dwell on it. I prefer to focus on what did happen. You gave me a choice when everyone else wanted to take my choices away. That made all the difference." "You made the choice," Kieran pointed out. You chose to stay, to trust me, to build this life with me. I just gave you the opportunity." "We saved each other," Violet said softly. "I needed someone to see my value, and you needed someone to share your dreams with. We found each other at exactly the right moment." Kieran pulled her close, and they stood together in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear overhead. Inside, they could hear their children finally settling down for the night. Tomorrow would bring more work, more challenges, more of the endless tasks that came with running a ranch and a school and raising a family. But tonight, Violet simply savored the peace and contentment that came from knowing she was exactly where she was meant to be, with the man she was meant to love. The years continued to unfold with both joy and occasional hardship. There were lean years when drought affected the cattle, and prosperous years when everything seemed to go right. There were illnesses that kept everyone on edge until they passed, and celebrations when James graduated from Violet's school as her top student in 1895, announcing his intention to help his father run the ranch. Grace proved to have a gift for music, and Kieran purchased a piano for the house when she was 12 so she could practice properly. The twins were inseparable and mischievous, but also bright and hardworking. All 4 children grew up understanding the value of education and honest labor, watching their parents model both every single day. In 1897, Harold Bentley died in Dallas. Violet received a letter from Carolyn, who had never remarried and seemed to be living in reduced circumstances. The letter was stiff and formal, simply informing Violet of her stepfather's passing. Violet felt nothing at the news except perhaps a distant relief that he could no longer hurt anyone. She showed the letter to Kieran that evening. "I should feel something," she said. "Sadness or anger or something, but I just feel empty." "He lost his chance to be part of your life a long time ago," Kieran said. "You do not owe him grief." "I know, it just feels strange." Violet folded the letter and set it aside. "I have everything he wanted me to believe I did not deserve. A good husband, beautiful children, meaningful work, respect in the community. And I have it because you saw worth in me when he saw only a burden." "I saw what was plainly there for anyone with eyes to see," Kieran said. "You were always strong and capable and deserving of good things. Some people are just too blind or too cruel to recognize those qualities in others." Violet leaned against her husband, grateful as always for his steady presence in her life. They had been married nearly 14 years now, and her love for him had only deepened with time. He was not perfect, he could be stubborn, and sometimes took on too much work himself instead of delegating, but he was kind and honest and devoted to his family. "I love you," she said simply. "I love you too," Kieran replied, kissing the top of her head. "Always have, always will." In 1900, as a new century dawned, the Crawford Ranch stood as a testament to what could be built with hard work, integrity, and love. The property had expanded to nearly 5,000 acres, supporting a herd of over 4,000 cattle. The Crawford School educated more than 40 students and had gained such a good reputation that families were moving to the area specifically so their children could attend. James, now 17, worked alongside his father as a full partner in ranch operations. Grace, 15, had begun teaching music lessons to younger students in addition to her own education. The twins, 12, were starting to show interest in different aspects of ranch life. Thomas loved working with the horses, while Henry preferred the business and accounting side of things. Violet was 41 years old now, with silver threading through her blonde hair and lines around her eyes that came from years of squinting into the Texas sun. But she felt more beautiful than she had at 20, because she was confident and loved and living a life of purpose. One spring evening, Violet and Kieran took a rare moment alone together, riding out to the creek where Kieran had proposed all those years ago. The cottonwood trees had grown tall and provided dappled shade. They dismounted and sat on the bank, watching the water flow by. "Do you remember our walk here after that first storm?" Kieran asked. "Of course," Violet said. "You told me about your dreams for this place, and I told you about wanting to teach." "We have made those dreams real," Kieran observed. "Both of them." "We have," Violet agreed. though it was not always easy. "The best things never are," Kieran said. He took her hand, his calluses familiar against her palm. "But I would do it all again in a heartbeat. Every hard moment, every struggle, because they led to this." "To us," Violet said. "To us," Kieran confirmed. "And to our family, our home, our life together. You are still the best choice I ever made, Violet Crawford. The day I decided to intervene and give you options instead of leaving you to your fate, I tell myself I was being noble, but truthfully, I think I was drawn to you from the very first moment, like something in me recognized something in you." "I felt it too," Violet admitted. "Even through the fear and confusion, there was something about you that made me feel safe. And then as I got to know you, safe became trust, and trust became friendship, and friendship became love." "The deepest love of my life," Kieran said. "Thank you for choosing to stay that day. Thank you for choosing me every day since." Violet kissed him, putting all her love and gratitude into that simple gesture. They were older now, their passionate youth tempered by time and responsibility. But the connection between them burned just as bright, perhaps brighter, for all they had weathered together. As the sun set and painted the sky in brilliant colors, they rode back to their home. Smoke rose from the chimney where Grace was probably making supper, following her mother's recipes. The sound of hammering came from the barn where James and the twins were repairing a stall. Lights glowed warmly in the windows of the main house and the bunkhouse beyond. This was home. This was family. This was the life Violet had built from the ashes of her darkest day, the future she had dared to reach for when given the smallest opportunity. The years continued their steady march forward. Violet and Kieran celebrated their 20th anniversary in 1903, surrounded by their children, their ranch hands who had become like family, and friends from throughout the community. It was a joyous occasion, filled with music and laughter and dancing under the Texas stars. By 1905, James had married a sweet young woman named Laura, daughter of a neighboring rancher, and was building a house on Crawford land for his new family. Grace left home to study music at a conservatory in Dallas, though she promised to return to Pecos eventually. The twins were learning to run different aspects of the ranch operation, preparing to take over as Kieran gradually stepped back from the day-to-day management. Violet continued teaching, though she had promoted her assistant to co-teacher and now split the responsibilities. She was 50 years old and still vibrant, still passionate about education and community building. She had published several articles in education journals about rural schooling methods, gaining a reputation beyond their small corner of Texas. In 1907, Grace returned home with a new husband in tow, a musician she had met in Dallas. They settled in Pecos, and Grace took over the music education program at the school, allowing Violet to focus more on academic subjects. The newlyweds also performed concerts that became popular social events for the entire region. That same year, James and Laura welcomed their first child, making Violet and Kieran grandparents. When Violet held her grandson for the first time, she marveled at the journey that had brought her to this moment. From that terrified young woman being dragged through the streets to a grandmother holding the next generation in her arms, blessed beyond measure. The years of their lives together stretched out like beads on a string, each one precious and meaningful. There were losses. Dutch passed away in 1910 at the age of 78, and several of their older ranch hands followed in subsequent years. There were challenges, droughts, and economic downturns, and the changing nature of ranching as the 20th century brought new technologies and methods. But through it all, Violet and Kieran faced everything together, their partnership unshakable. They had built something that would outlast them, not just the ranch and the school, but the family and community they had nurtured. Their 4 children were all thriving in their own ways. James was becoming an even better rancher than Kieran had been. Grace was transforming lives through music education. Thomas had started a horse breeding program that was gaining regional attention. Henry was managing the business side of operations with skill and innovation. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1913, Violet was 60 years old and Kieran was 59. They were grandparents to 8 grandchildren, with more likely on the way. The Crawford Ranch was one of the most successful operations in West Texas, and the Crawford School educated nearly 70 students with 3 full-time teachers. They celebrated quietly this time, just the 2 of them taking a trip to San Antonio for a week. It was the first time they had been away from the ranch together for more than a day or two in all their years of marriage. As they walked along the San Antonio River one evening, Kieran said, 30 years. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime, and sometimes it feels like yesterday. I know what you mean, Violet replied. I can still remember exactly how I felt the day you offered me a choice, like the world had suddenly expanded from a tiny dark box into something vast and full of possibility. And what do you feel now? Kieran asked. Violet thought about it, watching the lamplight dance on the water. Grateful, she said finally. Grateful for every day, every choice, every moment we have shared. Grateful that you saw me when I was invisible to everyone else. Grateful that you loved me enough to let me choose my own path, and then walked beside me on whatever path I chose. It has been the greatest privilege of my life, Kieran said softly, being your husband, the father of your children, your partner in all things. If I never do anything else worthwhile, I can still say I loved you well and was loved by you in return. That is enough for any man. They walked until the moon rose high and bright, talking about their children and grandchildren, making plans for the future even as they savored the present. When they returned to their hotel, Kieran made love to Violet with the tenderness and passion that had always characterized their physical relationship. Despite the years and the changes in their bodies, they still found joy and pleasure in each other's touch. The next morning, as they prepared to return home, Violet caught sight of herself in the mirror. She saw the lines on her face, the gray in her hair, the body that had borne 4 children and countless years of hard work. But she also saw happiness in her eyes, contentment in the curve of her smile. You are beautiful, Kieran said from behind her, and she jumped slightly, not having heard him approach. I am old, Violet corrected with a laugh. You are beautiful, Kieran insisted, wrapping his arms around her waist and meeting her eyes in the mirror. More beautiful now than the day I met you, because now I see not just your face, but everything you are. Your courage and strength and kindness, your dedication to our family and your students, the love you have poured into everyone and everything around you. That is true beauty, and it only grows with time. Violet leaned back against him, overwhelmed with love for this man who still had the power to move her heart after 3 decades together. I love you, Kieran Crawford. Thank you for giving me the life I was meant to have. Thank you for sharing it with me, he replied. They returned to the ranch to find everything running smoothly under their children's management. James reported on cattle sales. Grace shared news about her students' progress. Thomas showed off new foals from his breeding program. Henry presented accounts that showed another profitable year. You have all done wonderfully, Violet said, pride filling her voice. Your father and I are so proud of the people you have become. We had good teachers, James said simply, and his siblings nodded agreement. As Violet and Kieran settled back into the rhythm of their daily lives, they both felt the deep satisfaction of knowing their legacy was secure. They had built something meaningful from nothing, transformed pain and degradation into hope and flourishing. The ranch would continue. The school would continue. Most importantly, the values they had instilled in their children would continue, passed down through generations. In the evenings, they would sit on their porch and watch the sun set over land they had shaped with their own hands and hearts. Grandchildren would play in the yard, learning the same lessons their parents had learned before them. The sounds of ranch life, cattle lowing, horses neighing, men calling to each other as they finished their work, created a familiar symphony. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had taken the horse and ridden away that day? Kieran asked one evening. Sometimes, Violet admitted, but I do not think I would have survived out there alone. I was too scared, too unprepared. I needed someone to believe in me before I could believe in myself. You always had it in you, Kieran said. The strength, the intelligence, the capability. I just gave you the space to discover it. We gave each other that gift, Violet corrected. You were just as lost as I was in your own way. You had built a successful business, but not a life. We built the life together. Yes, we did, Kieran agreed. And it has been exactly what I needed, even though I did not know I needed it until I found it. As the stars emerged overhead, brilliant in the clear Texas sky, Violet thought about the long journey from that terrible day in Pecos to this peaceful moment. She thought about the choice Kieran had given her, and all the choices that had followed. Each one had led her closer to the life she now lived, the person she had become. She was no longer Violet Carmichael, the frightened girl being sold by her stepfather. She was Violet Crawford, wife and mother and grandmother, teacher and community builder, a woman who had transformed hardship into purpose and fear into love. She had not just survived, she had thrived, creating ripples of positive change that spread far beyond her own life. And it all started with one man who saw her value and gave her the power to choose her own future. That gift, freely given with no strings attached, had changed everything. As Violet and Kieran grew older, they gradually transitioned more responsibilities to their children, while still remaining active in the life of the ranch and community. Violet finally fully retired from teaching in 1920 at the age of 67, though she continued to mentor young teachers and serve on the school board. Kieran officially handed over ranch management to James in 1921, though he still spent time each day checking on operations and offering advice when asked. Their later years were filled with the joy of watching their grandchildren grow and begin having children of their own. The Crawford family tree expanded and flourished, creating a network of connections throughout West Texas. Family gatherings became legendary events, with dozens of Crawfords and their extended families descending on the ranch for holidays and celebrations. Violet published a memoir in 1922 at the urging of one of her former students who had become a publisher. She titled it simply A Choice Given, and it told her story with honesty and grace. The book found a modest audience, particularly among women's rights advocates who saw in Violet's story a powerful message about autonomy and opportunity. I never wanted to be famous, Violet told Kieran when the book's success surprised them both. I just wanted to tell my story so other women might know that even the darkest moments can lead to light. You have always been a teacher, Kieran said with a smile. This is just teaching on a larger scale. In 1925, the town of Pecos held a celebration honoring Violet and Kieran's contributions to the community. They were embarrassed by the attention, but grateful for the recognition. The mayor gave a speech praising the Crawford Ranch's economic impact and the Crawford School's educational legacy. Former students shared stories about how Violet had changed their lives. Ranchers talked about Kieran's fairness and integrity in business dealings. I just tried to do the right thing, Kieran said in his brief remarks. Treat people fairly, work hard, and love my family. If that made a difference, I am glad. Violet's remarks were longer, as befitted a career teacher. She talked about the importance of seeing potential in every person, of giving people chances to prove themselves, of building communities that supported rather than limited individual growth. I was given a choice when I desperately needed one, she said, her voice still strong despite her years. That choice saved my life and allowed me to build something meaningful. We should all be in the business of giving choices to those who have none, of creating opportunities for growth and change. That is how we build a better world. The audience gave her a standing ovation, and Violet saw tears on many faces. Her story had resonated deeply, particularly with women who understood what it meant to have limited control over their own lives. That night back at the ranch, Violet and Kieran sat on their porch as they had countless times before. They were both in their 70s now, their bodies showing the wear of hard-lived lives. But their minds remained sharp, and their love for each other undimmed. 42 years, Violet marveled. We have been married 42 years. Best 42 years of my life, Kieran said, and I'm hoping for at least 42 more. Violet laughed. That would make us well over 100 years old. Why not? We are too stubborn to die young. They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands as they had for decades. The ranch was quiet now, most of the family having returned to their own homes after the day's celebration. But Violet could still feel the presence of everyone who had been there, the web of love and connection that she and Kieran had created through their life together. "Do you ever think about that day?" she asked quietly. "The day you bought me from Harold?" "Of course," Kieran said. "It is the day my real life began." "Mine too," Violet agreed. "Everything before was just preparation, I suppose. All the pain and difficulty preparing me to appreciate what we built together." "I do not believe in fate," Kieran said slowly, "but I do believe that sometimes the right people meet at exactly the right moment. And when that happens, magic is possible." "Magic," Violet repeated, smiling. "Yes, that is a good word for what we created. Ordinary magic. The kind that comes from commitment and choice and love sustained over time." "The best kind of magic," Kieran said. The years continued their inevitable progression. Violet and Kieran enjoyed relatively good health well into their 70s, though age eventually brought its limitations. They moved more slowly, tired more easily, but they remained present and engaged with their large family and community. Kieran passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1928. At the age of 74, he had spent his last day doing what he loved, checking on cattle, talking with his sons and grandsons, sitting on the porch with Violet as the sun set. When Violet woke the next morning to find him gone, she grieved deeply, but also felt grateful that he had lived fully until the very end. His funeral drew hundreds of people from throughout the region: friends, family, business associates, former ranch hands, students Violet had taught. They all came to pay respects to a man who had lived with integrity and kindness. Violet stood by his grave, surrounded by their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, taking comfort in the legacy they had built together. She lived another 7 years without him, years filled with her family and continuing involvement in the community. She never remarried, feeling that her heart belonged to Kieran alone. She spent her days writing letters, reading, gardening, and most of all being present for the enormous family they had created. On a warm October evening in 1935, Violet Carmichael Crawford passed away quietly at the age of 82, sitting in her rocking chair on the porch she had shared with Kieran for so many years. She died as she had lived those final decades peacefully, surrounded by love, confident in the value of the life she had built. Her children found her there the next morning, a small smile on her face, her hand resting where Kieran's would have been. They buried her beside him on a hillside overlooking the ranch, in sight of the creek where he had proposed and the house where they had raised their family. The Crawford Ranch continued through subsequent generations, as did the Crawford School, which eventually became part of the public school system. Violet's memoir remained in print and found new audiences with each generation, her story of resilience and choice inspiring countless readers. The legacy of that single moment in 1882, when a man chose compassion over indifference and gave a desperate woman the power to choose her own future, rippled forward through time, affecting hundreds of lives in ways both large and small. And in the end, that was what mattered. Not the wealth accumulated or the land owned or the accolades received, but the love shared, the choices honored, the human dignity preserved and celebrated. Violet and Kieran had built a life founded on mutual respect and genuine affection, and from that foundation had grown something beautiful and lasting. Their story ended, as all stories must, but the impact of their choices lived on. The Crawford family continued to thrive, carrying forward the values instilled by their matriarch and patriarch. The ranch remained productive and successful. The school continued educating children, and Violet's memoir continued finding readers who needed to hear that even in the darkest moments, hope remains possible. Sometimes all it takes is one person willing to see your worth and offer you a choice, and the courage to choose well when that opportunity arrives. That was the lesson Violet learned and then taught to generations that followed. a simple but powerful truth that transformed one woman's tragedy into a triumph that blessed countless lives.